Originally, Fate had decided for me to play and review the Telltale Batman game. However, it was so long! Especially after I had just finished Duck Detective, which was only about 2 to 3 hours of gameplay. Not to mention, I'm not really sure how much of a detective game it truly is. So, while I slowly progressed through Batman, I decided to work on another game. I do have over 100 to do. I re-rolled my Fate, and as you can tell by the title, we were given this absolute gem of a game. It was also long! Murders on the Yangtze River by OMEGAMES is a murder mystery game set in the early 20th century following Detective Shen Chun-ping, English name John Shen, solving a series of murders along the Yangtze River. I want to start right off the bat and say that this game is not what I would consider junior detective friendly, especially the younger audience. So, any children and parents with young children present, I suggest changing the video as I will be showcasing imagery of blood, death throughout the rest of the video. You have been warned. These cases are obviously of the homicide variety, and despite the mild amount of blood and lack of gore, with the murder scenes drawn in, one can say, a cute style, I can't give it the stamp of approval for junior detectives. There are also some imagery and sounds that were targeted to elicit a fearful emotion from them, even though there were only a handful of these moments, mostly from Detective Shen's internal struggles. But there is no content I would deem of a sexual nature, and the language is never,
I am a prosecutor.
Gosh darn it! Okay, it's a solid PG-13. They got their one F-bomb in the very final case of the game, so I will give it the experienced junior detective stamp, those in the preteen and teenager range, with heavy emphasis on parent discretion for those of a younger scale. I was honestly surprised by this game. I went into it completely blind with no frame of reference for game style or play. After playing it, I did realize that this was reminiscent of what I knew about the Ace Attorney games by Capcom, and lo and behold, it is listed as one of their inspirations. I have yet to play those, however, so I don't know all the details about how Ace Attorney plays. I really do like that they have this here. I have to check out some of these later. Despite being a collection of cases, there is an overarching mystery that we are slowly pulled into for the end. I will go into detail for the first case, so beware spoilers, but the rest I would like to leave for you to play for yourself. Unexpected Misfortune starts you right off the deep end with being accused of the murder of a famous writer, and when I say this game teaches you really quick to pay attention to the details, I mean it. Usually in these sorts of games, I expect to do an investigation to find out what the missing detail is through a different screen or being told it, or there are a lot of needless details that don't play out. But there was a detail that was immediately off, even on this screen. I just couldn't tell what at the moment. This will be brought up again later. We get a quick flashback of the events leading up to Detective Shen losing consciousness and finding himself in this predicament. We arrive to meet the author Lo Pei about one of his stories that is very similar to a cold case that is very relevant to Detective Shen. This flashback is rather important, even if we don't know exactly how yet. I very much appreciated the developers not filling this moment up with needless fluff. There were even details that will come in handy for a future case. We meet Lo Pei, though his back is turned to us as he's writing at his desk. We get to explore a bit of the room before we are offered a rice cake. Taking a bite, Detective Shen immediately falls unconscious, only to wake up in the middle of the night, then once again when we are being detained by the police. And this is why we don't take candy from strangers, kids. With the room having been said locked, and only Detective Shen and the victim inside, we were immediately restrained and expected to be taken into custody. Thanks to Detective Shen's ability to stay cool under pressure and logical reasoning, we are able to start investigating the crime scene, and pretty quickly we can tell that we were haphazardly framed, with the blood splatter being against our back, with an obvious space on the floor where our body was. Easily, we are able to clear ourselves of at least the initial suspicion, and are allowed to continue the investigation. We finally get a better look at the victim's body. There are a few curious clues such as the faint smell of camphor wood on the deceased's hair, but without more information we cannot deduce why this would be yet. We also get information that he was stabbed with no defense wounds on his body, and there is white powder on his collar, which is suspected to be from rice cakes. It's very likely that Lo Pei was drugged, just as we were, by the rice cakes then murdered. But then, why would he have eaten rice cakes if he watched us fall unconscious from the snacks? While examining the body, the game gives us information on key phrases that Detective Shen would know, such as the relevance of blood splatter or what it means to have a hesitation wound. I even got to learn about livor mortis, which I often confused with rigor mortis. They still do somewhat explain these details in-game when Detective Shen is explaining to others, often during the deduction portion of the gameplay, but typically it's a good idea to take a look through these little notes beforehand. They also include historical information on this time period, which definitely helps provide context to situations we encountered going through the game, such as what an it girl would be considered in the context of this period, or what was important about cultivated talents. After examining the body, we also take a look around the crime scene because, as Detective Shen says, all contact leaves a trace. But just like the presence of the abnormal is something to look for, the absence of the normal is equally as important. Just looking around the room, I can already tell this would set off my OCD boss. I can already hear him cringing in pain at these scenes. Some of these items will not be answered for in this case, but they are definitely important. We take testimonies from all who were present to get an idea of the timeline that took place. Really quick, as a warning, I will be butchering these names as much as I try my best not to. I'm so sorry. In the middle of the night, Detective Shen arrived to meet Lo Pei. Our assistant Afu had left a little bit beforehand for his own errand so no one could collaborate Detective Shen's story about meeting Lo Pei or what had happened. We were asked a few questions by Lo Pei about if we had met him previously. Then we entered his house. He told us to put the beam onto the door to lock it behind us. Then Detective Shen ate the rice cake and lost consciousness. There are a few hours that are completely unaccounted for, except for an unknown time that Detective Shen woke up for simply a moment before falling back to sleep. Yangtze, an errand runner, had come to drop off Lo Pei's daily delivery of rice cakes early that morning. He comments that Lo Pei was typically outside by this point, but today he wasn't. He called out for Lo Pei, but there was no response. Lo Pei's nephew, Lo Shiwen, can collaborate with Yangtze's presence. Lo Shiwen arrived and knocked on the door, but hearing no response, he tried the door. He said he smelled blood and asked Yangtze to collect the officials. Yangtze ran to town to get Officer Ma and Judge Chang Yu. Officer Ma saw Lo Shiwen shaking the door, exclaiming that he could smell blood. Officer Ma immediately rushed forward and kicked the door, breaking it open with one swift kick. This witness statement is collaborated by Lo Shiwen and Judge Chang Yu. This is when Detective Shen was arrested after being found by the victim's body unconscious, and with the murder weapon. Nothing seems particularly out of place by these witness statements on the surface level. Now let's see about the MMO, means, motive, and opportunity. We know the killer needs to know about Lo Pei's routine. This is someone who used his daily delivery of rice cakes to their advantage. This information would be known by Yangtze, who delivers it, and Lo Shiwen, who was his uncle's assistant. There was mention that his love of rice cakes wasn't entirely secret, as his readers may know of this fact. That could give a possible means to Officer Ma. He apparently is a huge fan of Lo Pei's work, and Judge Chang, though the judge seems to have very little to no presence in Lo Pei's life. With the victim being drugged, I would believe that it would make it accessible for any of them to kill Lo Pei regardless of their strength or combat prowess. I would give means to Lo Shiwen, Yangtze, and Officer Ma. There were 3 suspects that had possible motive for the murder. Officer Ma, who had been seen arguing with Lo Pei the other night, Yangtze, who had been reported by Lo Pei for theft half a month prior and was even beaten for it. There is also the possibility of Lo Shiwen, though it's not entirely clear-cut as the other 2 from initial questioning. Officer Ma claimed that the argument was over drinks, and Lo Pei had opened up about his struggles as a writer, that Officer Ma became heated about the unfairness of his situation. If we take Officer Ma by his word, then his motive falls through. Not to mention he is a huge fan. Yangtze claimed that the theft had been a misunderstanding and it was water under the bridge. When confronted with the possibility of holding this grudge and taking revenge, he says that he couldn't even harm a chicken. Lo Shiwen is kin, but based on the testimony of others around him, he was known to be a lazy good-for-nothing. If he was meant to be Lo Pei's assistant, that would most likely cause strife, especially if he had any sort of inferiority complex towards his extremely successful writer uncle. So we can say all 3 had motive, it's just not as solid without undeniable proof besides hearsay. Anyone who had spoken against them were all related in some way to this case, so their statement should be taken with some scrutiny. Opportunity is difficult to say at this point, as there is quite a bit of time unaccounted for between us seeing Lo Pei and when the body was discovered. It seems like we just cannot find anything to give us a good timeline, until we find a piece of wood matching the beam that had held the door closed inside a locked wardrobe. and this piece aligns with the chunk of wood that is missing from the broken beam. The wardrobe is also made of camphor, which is the same scent that was detected on Lopez's hair. The only way that this could have been possible was if the beam had been broken before the wardrobe was locked, and with this clue, things start to fall into place. Here is the opportunity that we needed to really start honing in on this case. If the beam was already broken, how did it get broken after Detective Shen himself placed the beam? So the murderer had to have been already inside. If he was already inside, then where was he? Detective Shen searched everywhere, except inside the locked cabinet. But it made no sense for the murderer to be locked inside unless it wasn't the murderer. If it was already broken before Officer Ma broke down the door, then why was Lo Shiwen trying to open the door? We got our prime suspect. Now we just need to put together all the odd clues we have been collecting up until this point to make a solid case in front of the judge. Now we get to the game's deduction portion, where we have to prove our theory with solid facts under scrutiny of doubtful parties, or even the suspects trying to find their way out of the situation. It's back and forth with questions and answers, giving a finite amount of tries, except in very special cases where you might only get one chance. During this portion of the game, it becomes clear that character art is also a very important clue. We had been told a piece of paper was present in Detective Shen's memory when he first awoke, but gone after he was apprehended by Officer Ma. There were only 3 people inside the room when Shen awoke again. 2 were busy with Shen himself, which left only Lo Shiwen. This book that he had been holding has been bugging me since I first noticed the paper was gone, and when we finally get to address it, I was so excited to know that studying characters was going to be an important part of the game. I was ready to lock into every single person that crossed my path. After confronting Lo Shiwen, the stress takes a toll and he collapses into unconsciousness like a scheming imperial concubine. What? I watch a lot of Chinese dramas. There's a lot of fainting going on. The case is closed, but not entirely solved. However, not to worry, we get the means, we get the opportunity, and later on we do get the full motive, so ta-da! Case of the Unexpected Misfortune gets the MMO. As an introduction to the main 2 characters, Detective Shen and Afu, as well as gameplay mechanics and what is to be expected, it was definitely meant to be a little easier for first-time players. Detective Shen does somewhat spell out the information or questions for the players to answer while looking for evidence, but I wouldn't say the clues were blatantly obvious when first seen. I feel like the victim, often wearing a coat and hat iconic to Sherlock Holmes, was a reference to many of the locked room cases I see with Sherlock media, so I was already leaning towards my biased knowledge of them. I will give it a 3 gray cells out of 5 and a 5 out of 5 hearts. It was a good first case. Detective Shen and Afu's adventures continue, the cases becoming more and more intriguing as you solve them, while also trying to understand how they connect to the overarching cold case that Detective Shen is striving to solve. It would be a shame to spoil any more of this game, so I will just quickly rate each case. Case 2, Lady in the Wardrobe, clears MMO, would give it a 3 out of 5 gray cells, and 5 out of 5 hearts. I loved how they brought in the loose threads from the previous case to wrap up both cases neatly. Case 3, The Haunting Furnace, clears MMO, would give it a 4 gray cells out of 5 and 4 out of 5 hearts. There was this one timed mechanic used in this case and I absolutely hated it. Putting a timed event with reading definitely makes it hard to read as fast and properly process what was said, but I wouldn't put it any lower because the rest of the case was rather interesting. Case 4, Mystic Ship in the Mist. Clears MMO, special mention for the emphasis on use of timelines. Always love that. Would give it 4 gray cells out of 5 and 5 out of 5 hearts. Love confined whodunits. Case 5, The Confined Room Mystery. This one is a little more tricky because it's not really a case. It's much more heavily focused on the cold case Detective Shen is following. I will not give it the MMO for that reason. It will be used to decide in the final case. I would give it 5 gray cells out of 5. This one I felt was the least handholding the game had given us, while also emphasizing the importance of every single clue. I am conflicted on the heart rating because I absolutely love when stories get a little dark, especially with the flashbacks to Shen's childhood, but I also absolutely hate jump scares and getting chased. But it also does explain a little bit about the mysterious vision of Detective Shen that we've been getting throughout the game. I will give it 4 out of 5 hearts simply because of that gosh darn jump scare I got. Case 6, The Shanghai Enigma, Part 1. I do have to split this case into 2 parts because there is an immediate case, but then it brings us right into the conclusion of the cold case Detective Shen has been chasing for over 3 years. Part 1 cleared the MMO. I will give it a 4 out of 5 gray cells because of certain characters in play. It does feel a little bit handholdy at times, pushing an emphasis on certain clues. While I was happy to see side characters getting more time to shine, I did find myself a little annoyed with the deductions, not because they were bad, but I have been spoiled by Detective Shen's calm and cool nature. 4 out of 5 hearts. I'm sorry, Afu, I love you, I swear! Case 6, the Shanghai Enigma, Part 2. Now everything comes together. I would say this clears the MMO, especially if you have certain knowledge in history. I would give the case 5 out of 5 gray cells, as you have to recall a lot of information you had been collecting throughout the game spanning over 6 cases. And there was a lot of information that came in handy. They even threw in a pretty big red herring that almost got me. 5 out of 5 hearts. And with that, we close the final case and watch our band of investigators set off back onto the Yangtze River for future adventures. I very much enjoyed this game, having gone into it completely blind. Detective Shen might be one of my favorite investigators in media. He was so cool and collected. Even his little panics weren't out of control. There was only a little light shown on his alter ego, but considering how sensitive the topic of DID is sometimes online, I was sort of glad they didn't push it too much for the sake of entertainment. Afu was a very fun companion to Detective Shen, bubbly and light-hearted, but almost like an external source of emotion to the detective's cool. Just look at him. Overall, I would give Murders on Yangtze River a 4 out of 5 gray cells simply for the amount of hand-holding while collecting clues and occasionally during the deductions. I found all its cases really enjoyable and brain-scratching without a convoluted way to explain their mystery. And the music, I am absolutely in love with the soundtrack. When Brilliant Idea plays, you know something's about to go down. I still have chills when I first heard Stand as One. It's a 5 out of 5 hearts for me. I haven't played the new DLC yet, but I am definitely looking forward to it. I hope we see more of Detective Shen and his posse in the future.